You're listening to the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan.
Well, hello there, folks, and welcome to episode number 202 of the Just Japan podcast. Everything you want to know about Japan. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I'm a host you have not heard in a very long time. In fact, it's almost been 3 years since we last talked. All right. Hey, guys, I bet you're all wondering what the heck is going on. A Just Japan podcast episode has just popped into my feed. Well, if there are some of you left who have still remained subscribed to this podcast, I want to commend you and thank you so much for having that stick with it attitude and spirit. It has been a long time. The last time I uploaded an episode was actually June 16th of 2019, before the world went crazy with COVID and whatnot, which will be a bit of a theme during this episode of the podcast. Episode 201, I interviewed CBC reporter Adam Walsh, who at the time was working with NHK, Japan's national broadcaster, in Japan, and was heading back to Canada after several years of living and working in Japan. And here we are now, episode 202. You might be asking, hey, Kevin, why has it been so long? Well, it just has. I've moved on to other podcast projects. I've had a couple of education podcasts since then. I do work in the education industry as a homeroom teacher. But here we are, and in this episode, I'm going to sit down with my son Kai, who has changed a lot. And just to let you know, I'm happy, I'm healthy, I'm still married to my lovely wife I've been married to the whole time I made the Just Japan podcast, my wife from Osaka, Japan. My daughter just turned 9 years old yesterday. My son turns 12 in a couple of months. And life trucks on. We are still based here in Shenzhen, China. We'll be here for one more school year, and then we plan on moving on from China and leaving the China chapter of our life behind us, moving on to other pastures where we can move more freely, travel more freely, live life more freely. There were two main reasons why I wanted to record. Number one was to let you guys know that we are okay. I'm okay. We're going to talk a little bit about our story. During the past 3 years that I haven't been talking to you, we spent one of those years, almost an entire year, stuck, air quotes, in Japan during the whole COVID era, when COVID first kicked off. I suppose we're still in the COVID era. And another reason why I wanted to record today was to let you guys know that I am now recording new Japan content. I have a new Japan podcast, and it is called the Supernatural Japan Podcast, and I think you guys are going to like it. It is on all the major places to listen. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, Anchor, Stitcher, Amazon Music, all those places. So the Supernatural Japan podcast, I take a weekly look at different weird aspects of Japan, spooky, haunted, paranormal, UFOs, all the kind of cool stuff. A lot of history, so you guys will like the history. A lot of folklore. So in episode 1, I talk about the Shinichi department store fire, which happened in Osaka, Japan, in Namba, back in 1972. That was a tragic fire. A lot of people died. It's the site of the current-day Bic camera, which is an iconic electronic shop tourist destination in Osaka, which is said to be extremely haunted because of this incident. So we talk about that. Another episode, I talk to author Philip Jackson, who is based in Kyoto, about his book, Paranormal Kansai. He talks a lot about different hauntings in Kansai. Lots of cool things. At the moment, as I record this, I've got 5 episodes up for you. Number 6 will be out in a day or two. So probably by the time you listen to this, there'll be 6 episodes up there. So it's a new form of content. All the links are below in the show notes of this episode. Go over there. Please subscribe to the new podcast. If you're listening here, if you were a Just Japan fan, you'll be a fan, I think, of the new podcast. Even if you're not into the kind of whole spooky this and that, there's a lot of cool stuff about Japan, a lot of history, a lot of folklore. And that's I'll be taking a lot of different neat directions. So I'm pretty excited about that podcast. And so far, there's been a good listenership has been coming on board. And we can't wait to have all you guys come on board. Yeah. So, we are here in Shenzhen, and Kai's going to talk a little bit about that later, where Shenzhen is. We've been here on paper 4 years. about a year that we were actually in Japan, in Osaka. And some of you who follow me on social media are probably aware of that. But if you don't follow me on social media, you're not aware of that. So that's where we are now. And I'm gonna right now I'm gonna sit back with Kai and tell you a little bit about our 2020 experience in Osaka, Japan. So take a listen. All right, so for those listening, those few of you who are still out there, I brought on a returning guest. Now, this guest was featured on the Just Japan podcast back in July of 2018. And at that time, Kai, my son, was 8 years old, and we did an episode about Japanese schools versus international schools, where he talked about his experience at being Ichinensei grade 1 at a Japanese shogako versus international school in Beijing. Well, we then, after that point, left Beijing, right, Kai?
Yeah.
And where did we go after Beijing?
We went to Shenzhen, China.
Okay, so I got to move some things around here, Kai. I'm going to ask you to speak a bit louder, Kai.
We went to Shenzhen, China.
So Shenzhen, China. And most people would not know where that is, and I have to admit, I didn't know where that was. No one in our family knew where Shenzhen, China was until we were offered a job position there. So where is Shenzhen kind of basically on a map?
By Hong Kong.
By Hong Kong. So it's really close to Hong Kong. It's on the Chinese mainland side of Hong Kong territory. We can actually see Hong Kong from our window. We're sitting in a bedroom right now recording, and you can see Hong Kong territory through the window. Okay, so we came to Shenzhen to work at a really nice international school. It was a professional decision, making a lot more money than I made at my school in Beijing. And then the world kind of went crazy. That was we came here in August of 2019, and then unfortunately in October my father passed away, and I went back to Canada for a few weeks. And then in February, kind of January of 2020, we started hearing rumors of stuff going on that was weird. Right, Kai?
Yeah.
And then do you remember during the Chinese New Year holiday at the end of January, do you remember what started happening?
COVID.
Yeah, COVID started happening, but we didn't know what it was, right?
Yeah.
So this is at the time when it was still called the Wuhan coronavirus. We knew something weird was happening up in Wuhan. And would you say that was a scary time?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Okay. It was. Man, a few words, Kai. So it was definitely a scary time, and what we found was a lot of our colleagues had been traveling anyway for Chinese New Year, because this is a time of year where a lot of people travel anyway. But some of our colleagues who did not plan to travel decided to go where? Where did people go?
Back to their, home countries.
Back to their home countries, right? So, I know your teacher at the time, she was her and her family were planning on staying here for Chinese New Year, and they all went back to America, right?
Yeah.
And they all went back to America, Kai's teacher and her partner and their 3 children. So we started getting nervous, and things started closing down here in China and shutting down. And again, this was at a point where we didn't know what COVID was. So it was very scary. So we decided to pull the plug and leave China. And where did we go, Kai?
Oh, Japan.
We went back to Japan because my wife is from Osaka. So we went to Osaka, right?
Yeah.
And initially, how long did we kind of think we might be in Japan?
1 month.
Oh, about a month. A month was our plan. And where did we stay there when we first got there?
Mitejima.
Mitejima. Where is Mitejima?
In Nishi-Odogawa.
Okay, so that's a ward of Osaka, and we had an Airbnb, and it was a small apartment. How big was that apartment?
Big as this bedroom.
As big as a bedroom.
Yeah.
A little bit bigger than a bedroom. Our bedroom's fairly big, the master bedroom. So it was a 1-room apartment. I guess we'd call it a... what do we call that? Not a bachelor apartment. I guess so, a bachelor apartment. Everything in 1 room, essentially. And after the Chinese New Year, we started doing online learning, and that 1 month turned into a lot longer. How long were we there in the end? Kai?
9 months.
9 months, almost 10 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, so because we initially thought we'd be there for a little while, we thought this weird Wuhan coronavirus thing would go away, and we could go back home to our apartment in China, where we'd only been for a few months, really. But that didn't, now it's, more than 2 years later? Well, more than 2 years later, I guess pushing 3, and we're still here. COVID is still here under that name. So in Japan, let's talk about a little bit about Japan life. What happened in the beginning for school for you guys?
We did online learning,
Yeah.
and
And how was that?
not nice.
Not nice.
Really, just stressful.
Yeah, stressful. It was something new for everyone. We'd never experienced that as students, as parents, and as teachers. And that kind of dragged on until near the end of the school year ended, the international school year. And the one thing I think Kai and his sister really lacked was contact with other kids. So what did you guys end up doing?
We went to Japanese school,
Japanese, like a language school? What kind of school?
elementary school.
You went to a Japanese elementary school. So they went to a local school. So the first thing that had to happen in order for us to go to the Japanese regular schools, we had to be residents. So I had to be a resident as well. So I had to apply for residency. We used our Airbnb as our address, so in that Nishi-Yodagawa ward of Osaka. And the kids went to a local elementary school for a few months,
Yeah.
I think. So up until the end of the international school year, which was like near the beginning of June, until summer vacation in Japan, which was near the end of July.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after summer vacation, you guys started up at Nozoto again, right?
Yeah, we did.
So they went back to that Japanese elementary school. And what we decided to do is, as it was dragging on to the fall and the new school year began, China had in the spring closed all of its borders really tight. And we essentially had to reapply for visas, which was a nightmare. We kept having to wait for this thing called a PU letter from China, right? And
Yeah.
no one ever knew what PU stood for. Maybe stinky, I guess, right? But we got this letter, but it was just this arduous process that went on and on and on and on and on and on, and the Chinese government made it really hard for us to get back. But we wanted to come back because our school had taken such good care of us and really supported us financially while we were in Japan. But our time in Japan was great in many ways, right?
Yeah.
So what were some of the awesome parts about being stuck, air quotes, in Japan?
I could spend more time with family, friends,
Yeah.
and my grandma and grandpa,
Mm-hmm. Which you call your
Bachan and Ji.
Bachan and Ji-chan. So what we did was we made sure that we stayed in the same neighborhood as Kai's grandparents, and we could walk there.
Yeah, 20, 30.
Bit of a
minute
walk, sometimes a bit more like 45 minutes even.
Yeah.
But we ended up having to move, I counted 6 times altogether. Not 6 different apartments, but 6 times during our stay in Japan to different Airbnbs. And that's one thing that we found really challenging was that Airbnbs were just shutting down left and right because Japan had closed its borders too, which meant there were no tourists, which meant there were no one to stay in people's Airbnbs. So a lot of Airbnbs shuttered, and what people actually did was they turned those apartments into long-term apartments, like regular monthly rent apartments. So we couldn't rent them anymore. So you got to see your grandparents more than ever before.
Yes.
Time with friends. I've got some dear friends. Very multiple returning guests on the Just Japan podcast was our friend PJ, and we got to spend a lot of time with him. And he introduced us to a very cool geolocation game called Munzi, which was very similar to geocaching. And we played a lot of that. And, and then we came back. So after about 10 months, we returned to China and continued life. Yeah. And then here we are.
Still COVID.
And COVID's still here too, which is why we're recording this in May 2nd, 2022. And we're still in a way stuck here because we can't travel here, or we can't leave Japan this summer. We can't leave China this summer to visit family and friends because, number one, it just costs too much with the lack of flights and things around the world. But also, even though we have valid visas and we could return to China, they're making it really hard. It's not a friendly place to be if you're an expat, which is why we made decisions as a family where we're on the twilight era of our time here in China. We're going to be moving on to other pastures after another school year. So, yeah. Well, okay. Thank you, man. A few words, Kai.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us to give us a little update about our time in Japan.
Bye.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you who are still here. First of all, thank you so much for still being here. I can't believe it, but I'm very happy. We might be popping back from time to time in this space to say hello in the Just Japan podcast space. Thanks for Kai for sitting down with me for a few minutes. He was a boy of few words in that interview, which is interesting because he never stops talking at other times. It's interesting how that happens. I joked with him after we recorded saying, what I need to do all day long is follow you around with a microphone to keep you more quiet. But yeah, so that's it for this little mini Just Japan podcast, episode 202. Thanks for listening. Come on over to the Supernatural Japan podcast. Do a search for us. We've got a Facebook group and an Instagram feed as well. At Instagram at .com/Supernatural Japan and Facebook.com/groups/Supernatural Japan. And again, just search for the podcast. Click the links below. Come over and subscribe. We want to have you guys over because, again, I know the Just Japan podcast community, those of you who are still out there, again, like I'll reiterate, you guys like this content. You're going to like the new content I'm producing over there. So come and join the Supernatural Japan podcast family. We can't wait to have you over there. So wherever you are in the world, folks, I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. And I'll be talking to you real soon over on the Supernatural Japan podcast. Later, guys.